Happy Earth Day to you. Happy Earth Day to you. Happy Earth Day, dear Earth. Happy Earth Day to you. What'd you wish for, Earth? What'd you wish for? Folks, how we doing? My name is Jimmy Selesky, notable Earthling. Greetings. It is Monday and I'm glad to be here. It was quite the weekend. We'll talk a little bit about it, that and the true spirit of Earth Day. But before we do that, let's just give you a quick run through of what I intend to talk about today. Of course, you and everyone are widely aware of this recent foreign aid bill that just passed in the House. 95 billion buckaroos. That's a lot of... It's a lot. We're doing it for Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan. You name a country. Oh, it's going there, baby. Foreign aid. That also included the TikTok bill that you guys have heard about to no end as well. So a lot going on with that. It wasn't one bill. It was like 5 separate votes all at once. We're going to discuss the repercussions and ramifications of that. Also over the weekend, I didn't catch it until yesterday, but Tucker Carlson was on Rogan. And that's, I mean, if you are me, that's a big deal. Great conversation, over 3 hours long. I caught the whole thing. So we're going to talk about some of the more, I would say, interesting parts of that conversation and dive a little bit deeper into it. Also, in extra stupid news, and I don't even intend to really get into this. I just wanted to let you know that this happened again. And that is a man self-immolated. Now, if you're having trouble figuring out what self-immolated means, it's just a really annoying and unnecessary way to say a man lit himself on fire outside of the Trump trial in New York. I don't know if that was yesterday or today, or it wasn't today. It was like over the weekend. All this stuff happened over the weekend. The point is, and I guess since we're not going to spend too much time on this at all, we might as well just knock this out right off the bat before we get into the topics I do want to discuss. The point is, I read his name. I've already forgotten it. Now, last time someone did this, it was out front of the Capitol building or the something like that in D.C., and it was a guy doing it for Palestine. Free Palestine! You know, his first scream was good. And then, you know, once he started getting to like, you know, medium rare, it was like, ah! I knew his name at the time. Everyone knew his name. Everyone was, rest in power. Whatever. I can't remember his name. Start with an A. Was it Aaron? Aaron something? That's the point. Hey, he was the toast of the town. If you were a pro-Palestine, whatever person. People were trying, don't ask the question why someone would ever light themselves on fire. Instead, ask yourself the question, why do we exist in a country that would drive someone to do that? We kind of don't. In fact, I'm not even exactly sure there is such thing as a country that would drive a sane human being to light themselves on fire and burn alive. I'm having a hard time imagining any country. Even if you lived in a country that was so horrible that the best option you had was to kill yourself, even at that juncture, burning yourself alive in public would still not be the most sensible way to do that. So I'm having a very hard time imagining this hypothetical country that is driving these apparently perfectly sane and not mentally ill on any level people to light themselves on fire in public in protest of something. And perhaps now that I'm demonstrating the point, because that is the point that I'm trying to make here is, don't Google it. Maybe you've already Googled it. Maybe during this segment you were like, oh, what was that guy's name again? But without Googling it, what was his name? That's my point. Some of you may remember, some of you may not. But it's only been like a month and a half. It hasn't even been 2 months. By next year, it's not even a question. And even back then on the show, I said he achieved nothing. And I feel bad for this guy because he's obviously mentally disturbed. No sane person does this. I'm sorry. I talked about it a little bit with my cousin Nick and my brother Dom, who came through the podcast yesterday over the weekend. And they mentioned like the Tibetan guy who like lit himself on fire and like stayed in a meditative state the whole time. I conceded that can be kind of badass. There's something about an Asian guy and meditating that makes lighting yourself on fire seem semi not insane. It's still insane, but it's just a different vibe than like a skinny, 20-year-old white guy flailing around in front of the Capitol building on fire. That's just a screaming free Palestine. It's just a different vibe, So I'll admit that. But in the context of what we're discussing with this, the guy, the Free Palestine guy, and of course the guy who did it over the weekend for the Trump thing, perhaps now that enough people have done this for potential newcomers that are planning on doing this to see that like it doesn't have an effect. Like the situation in Palestine is getting worse. Whatever situation existed in Palestine and Israel a month and a half ago, as we will discuss later today, has only gotten worse. And that had nothing to do with whether or not this dude lit himself on fire in the name of Palestine. Palestine didn't care. Israel didn't care. You pretended to care, and then you forgot his name within 2 weeks, even though you swore that he was a, rest in power martyr for the cause. And now we don't even know who he is. And that's how politics uses people up. They say your name as long as it benefits the cause, and as soon as it loses steam, they forget about you, and now his charcoal body is, did they finish cremating him? Do you cremate a person who burns alive, or is that kind of like too soon? Anyway. So another guy did it in front of the Trump trial. And there's no other way to look at it other than this is an insane person. This is what insane people do. If you, in your own mind, in your own daily life, have a cause or an issue that you want to address, and you have deduced after long, careful thought that the most effective way for you to get your point across is to do that, to self-immolate, I beg you to reconsider. I cannot stress enough how wrong you are. But, there's always going to be those people. And there's always going to be shows like this to talk about them briefly. And moving on, let's get into this foreign aid bill, guys. Once again, it is Earth Day for April 22nd. That is Earth's birthday, right? Earth was created on April 22nd. I don't know the year, but I'm fucking with you because there can be no such thing as a month or a day or a year for that matter without the Earth. So I don't know exactly why Earth Day was decided to be April 22nd. It feels like the right day, though. I feel like every April 22nd in my life has been a decent day. Let me look this up. Is Earth Day always on April 22nd? Or is it like the fourth Monday in April or something? Sometimes holidays are like, just like, oh, it's the fourth. Okay. Annually on April 22nd. So it just so happens to be a Monday this year. It's not a federal holiday. This isn't like Memorial Day. People aren't grilling for Earth Day. I remember in elementary school, we would walk around and like pick up pollution and stuff, but I didn't really do that today. I tell you what I do. I refrain from polluting year round. And then on Earth Day, I continue doing that. No, I like Earth Day. I think it's a good holiday. I have seen surprisingly few people post about it today. I think there might be more important things going on, but even like the Earth, you know, those chicks that are like, that you follow on Instagram that like, you know, somehow they know you, not like Instagram models, but just like girls, you know, that are like really into the moon for some reason. They're like oh my God, it's Pisces season. Oh my God, it's Taurus rising. Thank you, Mother Earth. Love you, moon goddess. You'd think I'd see some Earth Day posts from them, but I'm just not seeing it. So I'm here to let you know, as your apparently local granola earthy moon chick in your feed, me, Jimmy Selesky, that it's Earth Day. So thank you, Earth, for allowing us to live on you. And we'll try to keep it going. But anyway, speaking of Earth, foreign aid. This is a big planet. United States is one of the countries on this planet. And this weekend, the United States government decided to send billions and billions and billions of dollars, tens and tens of billions of dollars to virtually every other country on this planet, barring us, United States. Now, I have a mixed bag of feelings here that I'll talk about. I think the answer is a little bit, it's not quite as simple as I think a lot of the anti-war people are making it, but it's also obviously not nearly as simple as all the pro-Ukraine, pro-Israel people are making it either. But just to recap the details here, the House of Representatives, that is. House passes a $95 billion foreign aid package to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. The breakdown of that is $60 billion to Ukraine, in which that passed 311 to 112 in the House. Now, on that particular point, like the Ukraine point, because it was like every single, like Israel, Ukraine, Taiwan, the TikTok thing were all voted on separately. So I'm not sure exactly what the distinction here was. If it was like 4 separate bills, it was one bill, but they voted on it in like some weird way. Actually, to be honest, I don't actually mind. I heard a lot of people complaining about, you know, this kind of quote unquote unprecedented way of going about it where they voted on each issue. I've been saying for a while, I think that's preferable. You know, I think that the opposite of that, what they call pork barrel legislation, where you just you throw a bunch of stuff into a bill and then you make that bill seem like it's just about that, and then you kind of like sneak in a whole bunch of other things in the back door that just piggyback and get passed along with the main thing. So like now you could have like 7 things that everyone agrees with, and then because one faction is trying to get this other thing that in many cases has nothing to do with anything else in the bill, but they're just looking for a way to get that passed as well. Now that bill never gets passed because it's held up with all this other stuff that is completely irrelevant that people just want to get passed through. So I actually like the idea of saying like, look, we don't need to make a bill that approves each one of these countries, each one of these issues, unanimously, and all of them need to be approved just for one of them to be approved. Why don't we just vote on Ukraine, vote on Taiwan, vote on Israel, vote on the TikTok bill, and go about it that way? I actually think that's a much better way of going about it. And the fact that it was handled so promptly says two things. The first of which being that, yes, it does seem to be a more effective way of going about it. And the second thing being that whenever the uniparty, monoparty, meaning the deep state bureaucracy, puppet politicians on both sides of the aisle who are controlled by their special interests and lobbyists and campaign funders, whenever anything benefits their beneficiaries, these issues have no problem getting passed. So that's why we saw this get handled in such a timely manner, because these are all things that, in my opinion, that quote unquote deep state very much wants. So, but the Ukraine was the most divisive one of it, even though it wasn't divisive. It still passed 311 to 112 in the House. That's a very heavy majority, but that's the only one that I'm seeing in which the Republicans did not vote majority for. So the majority of Republicans did actually vote against the $60 billion to Ukraine. And we'll talk a little bit more in depth about Ukraine in a moment. But first, $26 billion to Israel. That includes, I think, something like 14, 15 in that ballpark of foreign aid in terms of whatever that would mean for Israel, but then also like $9 or $10 billion as a stipend for humanitarian aid for areas in Israel, like the Gaza Strip, for Palestinians and things like that. So it's kind of going to both of them. It's going to Israel for military purposes, and it's going to the Palestinians for humanitarian purposes. So we're like, with this Israel thing, we're basically like funding Israel with more money militarily, and then also like funding the cleanup process of helping the people they're militarized against. Not saying that the Palestinians aren't. We'll touch upon it. We've talked about it a bunch. I'm not going to get too far into the Israel thing, but that's just the way I'm looking at it on the surface. Also in there, just making it in under the radar, is Taiwan. That was actually the most unanimously agreed upon. Everybody was like, hell yeah, let's help out Taiwan. I don't even necessarily have a problem with that. Taiwan seems pretty cool. Their situation has been far less annoying and a thorn in my side than that of Israel and Ukraine. So I don't have Taiwan fatigue yet, and their situation is I see the reasons why we would want to help them out. And that was also the least money we sent was to them. And then again, the TikTok bill, that is the, that TikTok will be banned in the United States if ByteDance, their Chinese parent company, does not divest, meaning does not stop owning or does not have any stakeholdings in TikTok. So we don't want ByteDance, the parent company of TikTok, which is a Chinese operated company, which in China is just synonymous with a government controlled company in China, which the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, has unbridled access to. Obviously would have access to user data from the United States via the TikTok app, which they are a stakeholder or even majority stakeholder. So we're saying basically, look, TikTok can operate here if you part ways with ByteDance. And so that did pass, and they have a year to do it. Now, also, mind you, these bills have to pass through the Senate. So these are not finalized, right? Did the foreign aid bills pass? And let me just double check that real quick, guys. I don't want to be out here spreading misinformation. Bill pass Senate. Okay. Yeah, so they're voting on it like right now. So that's the other thing just to bear in mind, is these are not finalized yet. We do have a bicameral House of Legislature. A bill has to pass in both the House of Representatives and the Senate. So we'll see what happens with that. But something tells me if it had this much unanimous support in the House, that they're not really going to have an issue in the Senate. Now, I don't feel the need to talk about each one of these points one by one. We spent a lot of time on Israel and Palestine in the past. That's going nowhere but downhill. It's only going to get worse. And, that's what we're looking at. The Ukraine thing, I don't even necessarily know if that's going to be the thing that leads us to global conflict. I think so many people, including the Ukrainians, are completely checked out of this conflict. To the point that it's actually impressive to me that was the highest amount of money to be awarded in this foreign aid package was to Ukraine. I've heard people say that, they're running out of military-age men, so they're resorting to older people, handicapped people, and the Ukrainian people are just kind of like, what are we doing? And I just think this is just I think this is just a bottomless pit to throw our money at. And I'll tell you why I think that is. Here is Speaker of the House Mike Johnson. Kind of looks like Stephen Colbert. He's also 52 years old, and he looks like a 25-year-old with gray hair. I don't know how to put it. He doesn't look right. He's like a man boy or something. But this is Mike Johnson speaking on the passing in the House of this bill today.
Unlike the Senate's blank check, the House legislation has a number of very important features. It provides for greater accountability over Ukraine aid. It forces an end-game strategy for the Ukraine war. It includes a loan instrument of this foreign aid to Ukraine and the Repo Act to ensure that Russian assets pay for part of the bill. And unlike the Senate's bill, the loan system itself is a House innovation and allows for much needed insight. Now remember that 80% of the Ukraine funding will go to the replenishment of American weapons and stocks and our facilities and our operations. It also includes tough measures and sanctions on Iran and Russia and China, which most of the American...
All right, that was really the part I wanted you to pay attention to. 80% of the money for this foreign aid, so $60 billion to Ukraine, and according to him, in his own words, 80% of that would be 48 billion of the 60 billion. So 80%, 4/5 of it, 48 billion, is going to the U.S. replenishment of weapons. So that's the thing that I think is most important to understand about what we really mean by foreign aid. Because I think a lot of people think it just means we just write the term that they continue to use in this conversation, is a blank check. And in many cases, that is true. In very many ways, that's another huge aspect of it, which is we just throw a bunch of money somewhere, and then it is kind of a blank check. And we have no way of tracking where it's going, who it's going to, who it's benefiting. And that's what you see in countries. You see Haiti, all that money that went over there, and now they're worse off than they were back then, with all that aid we sent. And it never got to where it needed to go. And so in many ways, that's what foreign aid is all the time. We just send money to countries, and it's just their politicians and their corrupt business owners putting their hands in the cookie jar, getting their share, and then by the time it reaches the people, there's nothing left. And therefore, the issue never gets solved. If you don't believe me, another close-at-home example is Flint, Michigan. But anyway, another major part of foreign aid is we're purchasing weapons from our own companies to give to them. That's what foreign aid is. So 80% of this $60 billion, $48 billion of this bill for Ukraine, of this for this foreign aid is going to American military defense, whatever contractors, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, you name it. Please, you name it, because I started blanking after that. And then we're replenishing their supplies via basically granting our own military industrial complex a $48 billion contract for new weapons and ammunition and what have you. And when you see it that way, because it seems like, I guess it's kind of like right in front of your face the whole time that like that's what that really means. But until someone really says it out loud and you think about it and you realize like, oh, wow, all these foreign aid packages, it's not just sending a blank check across the ocean to another country and then forgetting about it. This is actually just kind of our own government granting our own, in this case, defense contractors, a $48 billion contract for development. And when you see it that way, it kind of becomes clearer a little bit what the motivation. You always see, quotes and YouTube videos with cool cello music behind it. It's like, war profits this man, whatever. It is. And when you understand that, like, okay, you talk about the homelessness issue, which is something that they discuss in the Tucker Carlson, Joe Rogan podcasts over the weekend, which we'll touch upon again later on this episode. But when you speak about the homelessness issue and you go to these cities, and like Tucker Carlson was saying, and like many people have said, you would assume that cities that have an immense homeless population have that immense population because there's simply not enough money being set aside to, mediate this issue. And in reality, counterintuitively, it's actually precisely the opposite situation. It's that so much money is being thrown at this issue that an entire industry has been built upon it. And now that industry, in order to continue to exist, hundreds of jobs, millions and billions of dollars going into this issue, this homelessness crisis, well, this only exists so long as homelessness exists. You understand? So if the homelessness issue was actually solved, then everybody who is paid to solve it and makes money off of the fact that it exists loses their job, loses their livelihood. And so the motivation is not to get rid of the homeless problem. The motivation is to profit off the homeless problem, because the worst thing that could possibly happen is everybody gets a home and now there's no need for this billion-dollar industry that is, homeless shelters and food banks and whatever and all these other things that people are making a ton of money off of. And that's everything. That's the welfare system. And that is the education system. You could make the argument, and it probably is the case, that Baltimore City continues to get as much money as they do, which is immensely higher proportional to their student base than virtually any other jurisdiction in the state of Maryland, at least. And they continue to get that much money per pupil precisely because their system is so bad that if they actually began functioning to a satisfactory level, that they would lose all that money that's coming in all the time that they're pocketing and making. So it is, all these things become self-standing issues, and that's what we're looking at with wars. You're sitting here trying to figure out what is the motivation? Like, what is the end game with this Ukraine thing? I don't know. I never, this is another thing. I'm so happy. I've never been one of those people that had the Ukraine flag, because I always thought it must be embarrassing that one day when you finally decide to take it out of your bio. And it's like, because at what point, like, do you have like a flag, or you had like the black square? And then like, is there like a day of the week when you're like, oh, you know what? Okay, time to delete the Ukraine flag and post a Palestinian flag. And so it's like, you have to consciously know that like, you're just saying like, I don't want to play with this toy anymore. This issue's old. This issue isn't the new cool, sexy thing, cause, whatever. And so let me put this flag in here, you know? When all of you got rid of your links to the Black Lives Matter website after George Floyd and replaced it with whatever else popped off after that became the next worst thing in the world. It's weird to me that people, because I see people do that. Like I see somebody be like, one day you're the Ukraine guy, and the next day you're the Palestine guy, and the day after that you're the Black Lives Matter guy, and then a week after that you're the abortion guy, and it's like, you're just whatever they tell you to be. It's insane. But anyway, I never got into it. People have been saying for a long, this is not new news, that the entire situation with Ukraine and Russia was basically instigated by the West, by the Europeans, by America, maybe even mostly by us. Being that Ukraine was a neutral territory, this kind of buffer zone between our societies, being the Western societies, the European Union, US, whatever. Look at that as like NATO. Let's say that, since that's the term I should have been using the whole time. NATO and Russia. And so Ukraine is this neutral, non-NATO, non-Russian country that provides this buffer zone between us. And we had all but promised or agreed. I don't know if it was a contractual treaty agreement or if it was just a spoken agreement or what. I'm not an expert on this. Ukraine was not supposed to be entered into NATO. It's not supposed to be brought in. Putin, rightfully and understandably so, saw that as a threat, that our side, us, we are encroaching upon him. We're moving closer and closer and closer. Next thing you know, when they're a part of NATO, now we have NATO bases and military bases and missile launch sites and things like that directly on his border. And one can understand why that's not a situation that another sovereign nation that is in a contentious relationship with us, to say the least, would not like that. It's the same reason why the entire situation with the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the USSR, the Soviet Union, now Russia, then the Soviet Union, started trying to put missile bases in Cuba 90 miles off the coast of our country in America. And we said, no, hell no. And that was the Cold War. You know, so this is all this stuff matters. It's not just like pedantics or like petty shit. It's like, no, we kind of antagonized Russia into this war. For sure. And I'm not being a Putin apologist. I'm not defending Putin. I'm not saying he wouldn't have done some shady shit like this otherwise, just by the sheer nature, if nothing else, that we have an extremely weak administration and leadership right now. That is, you know, I don't think it's a coincidence that in the past 3 years, we now find ourselves in 4 different global conflicts, all of which seem to be pointing towards a world war. That is the effect of weak leadership. And we're seeing that. But the point is not only did we draw him in with our weakness, but we actively instigated it. We actively talked about bringing him in, knowing that it was going directly against any agreement we had with Russia about that was there for a reason. There was a reason Ukraine wasn't in NATO. And so at that time, you get the ball rolling. So next, Putin invades. Okay, so Putin invades, and in a fairly short period of time, after the smoke and dust settle and everybody is got done adding the Ukraine flag to their bio and, you know, whatever they were just told to care most about of anything in their life, or at least pretend to do so, they got done editing their profiles on Twitter and Instagram, and that was all settled. All the dust is settled. Fairly quickly into that altercation began peace talks, negotiations, concessions that could have been made. And this, of course, is not even getting into what the actual people in Ukraine want, particularly in the regions in question, like the Donbass region and other regions, and I'm not going to pretend to know the name of. But again, with my, semi-layman but semi-like conceptual understanding, not detailed and specific understanding of this conflict, but the conceptual understanding that I have about this is that the citizens that actually live in these areas of Ukraine that Putin was specifically targeting actually voted heavily to join Russia as opposed to Ukraine. They actually see themselves as Russians more than Ukrainians. And I could be wrong, but regardless, that's just another thing to kind of throw in the recipe, but it doesn't even matter because the point is we were in the midst of peace negotiations of stopping the conflict from escalating further. And those negotiations were actively discouraged, squashed, and shut down. And so now, and again, this is all a result. And I'll say this because I'm going to say the common sense evaluation of that situation first. And then afterwards, I'll go into the even worse truth about it. The common sense version of that is what we talked about with the Israel-Palestine, Israel-Iran thing, actually more specifically, which is that in these power struggles, neither country is in a position to back down because the second you back down, that's a display of weakness. So both countries, just like we talked about in that bar fight, one guy talks shit to you, next guy, you got to talk shit back. If he slaps your drink, you got to throw it. You can't, both guys have to be in a position where they don't look like the one who's afraid to fight. And so when you find yourself in this back and forth of like, okay, you do an airstrike here. Okay, well, we have to do something or else we're going to look like a bunch of bitches and you're going to look like the more powerful country. And we can't let that happen because we're the United States and we're NATO. So then we're going to do this back to you. And then that escalation just keeps on going back and forth. And there really is no conceivable end to it because neither country is willing to back down. You want to give them an out. If you give him an out, if you can say, okay, look, you invaded, we're not going to let this shit go any further, but I tell you what, you already did this, keep that, whatever the agreement is, as long as both parties can walk away looking like they put their dick on the table and got something out of it, then that's all you need to reach a peace agreement. So maybe that common sense evaluation doesn't work because that's what a peace negotiation is all about. It gives both parties an opportunity to walk away with their heads up. But the common sense evaluation that I just described is not the full scope of things, as I'm coming to learn. And as we've all kind of intuitively grasped at this point. But the real truth of the matter is that just like the homelessness crisis in your local city that requires homelessness in order to function. If you're somebody on the committee at your local government or you run this shelter or you do this food thing, whatever, soup kitchen or what, all kinds of different organizations, you name it. There's so much money going into these, okay? When you hear these bills about the city is dedicating, $400 million or $2 billion towards homelessness. Where do you think that money's going? It's going to all the organizations and businesses and people and administrators and bureaucrats that deal with that issue. And so basically by maintaining homelessness and then saying, look how bad it is, we need more money, that's how they sustain their existence. We have this conflict going on in Ukraine that there is no real ending to this. Ukraine is not going to win this by themselves. They're not simply going to use our weapons and ammunition and win. And they're especially not going to do that in any timely fashion where we can afford to toss them $60 billion every year worth of U.S. weapons and ammunition for the next infinity years it would take for them to beat Russia, a much larger, more military competent and powerful country. So the only way Ukraine wins this war is if we actually join them. The West, NATO, United States, our military, boots on the ground. That's the only way and nobody wants that to happen. That would be World War III. If we find ourselves in a boots on the ground military conflict between the United States and Russia, Russian soldiers shooting at American soldiers, we're already there in World War III if that becomes the case. So the alternative is let's just keep on sending money to Ukraine so they can continue to I don't even know what they're managing to do. I don't think anything. They failed in the counteroffensive or whatever other things I'm hearing. The point is, it's an unwinnable war. The best scenario for Ukraine is to come to the table and work out some type of peace deal because Putin wants that too. He can't surrender either. So just both countries are in a situation where they're just going to keep on throwing money into it. And Russia's going to keep on throwing their own resources into the war, which costs them money and resources. The entire West is going to be doing the same, throwing resources, money, and things like that into it. And you just watch this progression of just both sides just bankrupting themselves. It's not good for the citizens of either country. It is, however, great for the military defense contractors. And that's why these things continue. When you see a bill for $60 billion of foreign aid to Ukraine and $48 billion of that is going directly into the hands of our own U.S. defense contractors, private corporations that build these weapons and ammunition and missiles and defense systems and things like that we're going to then send to Ukraine, what that really is just granting a contract. It's kind of like when you're, again, I'll use city government as an example, if the mayor gets a nice, donation from a particular construction company CEO, and then lo and behold, that particular construction company gets the contract to, let's say in Baltimore's example, maybe build the Key Bridge or something like that. Who knows? I don't even know how that works, but maybe not the Key Bridge, maybe just a government building or whatever it is, where you have a connection and you use that connection to give somebody, you get this gig. And so now we have this ongoing conflict in Ukraine. We have our politicians of the mono party, the Democrats and the Republicans, the majority of which on both sides, and that's who they serve. And these defense contractors are donating to both of them. Look at the campaign donations. Go on to OpenSecrets.com. Just Google defense contractor campaign donations, Lockheed Martin campaign donations. You'll see that, they might sway a little bit more towards one party or the other, but they're donating to candidates on both sides of the aisle. This is not a partisan issue when it comes to funding the deep state and these lobbyists and this bureaucracy. Because at the end of the day, when it comes down to border security or rising gas costs, I can't help but notice that gas has gone up 10 cents every day for the past week. I'll let you know what it is tomorrow. But, border, rising inflation costs, everything like that. Those are the things that we still can't get anything figured out. But when it comes to sending off money to other countries, which in reality means just sending money directly to the defense contractors that are propping up their jobs, the politicians' jobs, giving them the donations, lobbyists and things like that, why would we come to the table for peace negotiations in Ukraine when we could send our campaign donors, aka the defense industry, military industrial complex, $48 billion more dollars of a contract to develop more weapons and more ammunition and more things to keep this conflict going on even longer. And then, so we're not even doing anything to end it. We're just sustaining it. We are sustaining the conflict in Ukraine, and that is the reason. That's the point that I'm trying to get to. Okay? It may be the case that we are at a point now where we have no choice but to continue the conflict. And that's all well and good, assuming that we had no choice to enter into the conflict in the first place. But as we've just discussed, that wasn't the case. As we've just discussed, we took actions of our own that almost caused an inevitable lead up to this conflict. We breached our side of these agreements. We instigated this. Was that on accident? How many wars, how many random countries throughout the world do we just have to suddenly, all of a sudden become experts on because one day it's the biggest deal in the world because now our military is involved with that country? How many times does that have to happen before you start seeing the pattern, which is war is profitable. And if you're in the business of war, you have no interest in peace. You don't make any money off of peace. We talked about the pharmaceutical industry and the mental health with the pills for every single anxiety, depression, and everything's a chemical imbalance. There's no cure. It's just take this pill every day. Here's your prescription. They make $0 by telling you to go get a gym membership or a healthier diet or a new job or earlier bedtime or whatever it may be. And likewise, again, with the homeless thing, they make zero money if they get all these people rehoused and they're no longer dependent on that system, that industry. And likewise, the same thing with the industry of war. The people who profit off of war have no interest in lobbying their puppets that they have in office, for the most part, these representatives that are just there to stay there. That's their job. If you're a politician, it's your job to make sure to get reelected. That's it. That's what your job is. If you're a politician, every 4, 6 years, whatever, you come up for reelection and you just want to get back in there. And the way you do that is by staying good, by all the people who are propping you up. And so if those people say, hey, vote this on that, this Ukraine thing needs to happen, they're going to do that. And it's not even because they're evil, all of them. Some of them are evil, but most of them are just too stupid to know any better. They think that they'll have a lobbyist come in there. And maybe even the lobbyist doesn't know that they're lying. But the point is, that's what we get into the conversation of useful idiots. Useful idiots. Someone at the very top has a plan. Someone at the very top understands the workings of this whole situation. And then as you go down the chain, you just have a bunch of people who just go, the lobbyist comes in there and they really believe it. And if you talk to them at lunch, they really believe in the cause that they're arguing for. But that's because they've been sold on it too. And then they talk to the politician who's just some freaking airhead who's willing to say and do whatever it takes to be in a position of power. And they both sit there and believe they're doing something right. And they vote for it. And none of them are smart enough to know that the only reason this is still ongoing is because someone's making money off of it. So there's $60 billion more dollars that we don't have, by the way. Our credit card is pretty much maxed out. But there's $60 billion more just for Ukraine. And then another 26 for Israel, and another how much for Taiwan, and then a whole other thing to get rid of a Chinese app in our country. Meanwhile, our own apps in our country are equally abusing our private information and data and using it against us. And altogether, $95 billion worth of throwing fuel on the fire of every global conflict currently ongoing and stoking more. Meanwhile, all the things that concern us here at home in our own country, we just can't seem to get anybody to come to the table on that. I wonder why that is. And something tells me if someone stood to make money, that whatever bill we're discussing, border, inflation, whatever it may be, that bill will be voted on real quick and by both parties because they're all controlled by the same people. I think we'll get into the Tucker Carlson thing tomorrow. We're coming up on an hour. I didn't think I was going to spend so much time on this foreign aid bill, but apparently I had a lot to say. I don't know how much of it was useful and how much of it was just me rambling. But regardless, folks, my name is Jimmy Selesky. This has been live from the studio, the Daily Edition. New episodes of this show with me every Monday through Friday, and the LFTS podcast with myself and Eric Glazer on weekends. Hit us with a subscribe, toss us a like, leave us a comment, and until next time, peace.